Hello and welcome to Lab Roots, the Life of Her Mind, an interview series devoted to learning how women think about their research, their field, and their future. Let's get started. Today, we are in conversation with Dr. Daphna Joel, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Tel Aviv University. Dr. Joel is a member of the School of Psychological Sciences and the Segal School of Neuroscience. Professor Joel completed her PhD in psychobiology at Tel Aviv University in 1998. She received the Alon Fellowship for Young Scientists and joined Tel Aviv University's Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience. Dr. Joel's work focuses on the relations between sex, gender, and brain structure and function. She has published over 70 papers and is the author of Gender Mosaic, Beyond the Myth of the Male and Female Brain. One of her central findings is that while biological sex is not an illusion, our binary conceptualization of sex is. Welcome, Dr. Joel, and thank you for taking time to give us a glimpse into the life of your mind.
Thank you for inviting me.
So maybe we can start with how you found your way into psychology and neuroscience. What brought you, what led you, what motivated you?
So thinking in retrospect, I think most of my career was led by passion. I was going after questions or topics that I found interesting and looked for ways or fields in which I could study these questions. So, and along the way, I started many things and left many things. So I studied mathematics, physics, and computer science, and left after a year and a half, realizing that I don't want to be any of these. And then started medical school and left after a year, realizing I don't want to be a physician. And I got to study psychology and neuroscience out of pure interest. And really... And this is also what led me to switch after several years from what I was studying back in the beginning, different disorders related to the basal ganglia and their relations with the frontal cortex, to a completely new area of study, which is sex and the brain.
Is it, I don't know if it's fair to ask as a follow-up, do you know in retrospect, or did you know at the time, what it was about, for example, medical school or becoming a physician that made you say, no, this actually isn't for me? And then even within studying psychology, neuroscience, that you gravitated to studying sex and gender?
Well, regarding medical school, I started learning or started studying, and the material itself was very, very interesting, but I wasn't sure about being a physician. So I went and volunteered in an emergency room, and quite quickly I discovered that, this is not for me. And it's too, I take it to heart too much, the suffering of others. And while we cannot avoid suffering of others in life, we don't have to choose this as a profession and deal with it every day, all day. So this is why I decided not to become a doctor.
Okay. And then, so maybe we can, as we talk about the work that you've been doing that ended up being your specialization, later on, the connection between, being as empathetic as you are and what you envision in the future for your field. So how did you get to the neuroscience of sex and gender, as opposed to where you originally started in psychology and neuroscience more generally?
So just really almost by accident, so a colleague of mine and a good friend retired, and she asked me to replace her, given a course on the psychology of gender. And because I have been a feminist, although I never studied it officially in university, but from the moment I remember myself, I have been a feminist. So I decided, why not? I'll teach this. This is an important course to have in psychology. So I sat at home almost for a year, reading a lot about gender and the psychology of gender. But as a neuroscientist, I was, of course, also interested in sex and the brain. and knew about books like, the female brain, the male brain, men for Mars. So I knew all of these myths, and I wanted to find out for myself. And while reading, I read into a paper, again, really by accident, that described sex differences in the rat brain. And what they found is that when the rats were stressed, the differences were reversed. Now, they framed this study as sex differences in the response to stress. But what I've noticed is that this means that there are stress differences, if you want, in sex effects on the brain. So how sex affects the brain can be opposite in different conditions, which was like, wow, this is, not something that I ever imagined. Mm-hmm. And just because of my surprise, it first led me to understand or realize my implicit assumptions regarding sex, because most of our assumptions are implicit to us, and surprise is a good opportunity to realize what they really are. So one is that sex effects do not reverse or change. So sex is something stable and it is always there. Another is a binary division. So, what I mean here is that things come in two sets. And where we get these ideas are, of course, from sex effects on the reproductive system or on the genitalia, in which this is quite true. So yes, in most people, the genitalia come in either one set of genital organs or another set, and they don't change. I mean, they develop, but they don't change from the male form to the female form. So this study made me realize that I was using sex effects on the genitalia, or the binary conceptualization of sex from the genitalia and the reproductive system, while I was thinking about the brain. Mm. And this study made me realize that maybe the genitalia are not a good model to think or conceptualize sex effects on the brain. So because of this study, I started to look for similar studies. Maybe, this is an anomaly. And I found many. So, once you know what you're looking for, and it exists, it's a real phenomena, then you can find. And this really what started my whole journey. It started with a theoretical paper in 2011 called Male or Female, Brains Are Intersex. And only a few years later, I managed to understand how to study the Mosaic hypothesis. Probably we'll talk about it in a while, but how to study this in humans. So really, I was preparing a course on the psychology of gender and ended up really discovering a new way of thinking about sex in relation to the brain. And I think now in relation to many other systems that are not the reproductive system.
Okay. So if I understand things correctly, our traditional assumption is that the fact of the stability, if you will, of reproductive distinctions makes us believe that stability operates in all parts of us, specifically that it drives the way we think, the way we behave, what makes us feminine or masculine. Is that sort of a one way we could think about the direction of going from reproductive organs to all sorts of ways we have of thinking about sex and gender?
So I would frame it a little different. And I think the question is how far the binary division extends beyond the genitalia.
Okay.
That's the question. It's not the question of how far sex affects extends beyond the genitalia, because we know that sex affects many systems in our body, not just the reproductive system. It affects the bones, cardiovascular system, fat and muscles, and the brain. So sex affects all of these systems. But the question is, do these effects add up consistently to create two distinct systems, as these effects do in the genitalia or in the reproductive system? So the question is not about, does sex affect us? Yes, it affects many aspects, but whether the binary division into female and male extends beyond the genitalia into other systems. And of course, I focus mainly about the question, does it extend into the brain and mind? And what we show is that it doesn't. But this is an empirical question. It's really important for me to say. The question how far the division, the binary division extends beyond the genitalia is an empirical question. Mm-hmm. And we developed tools to answer it, which weren't there. And the point is that previous research, and I'm talking about hundreds of years, because this question is, scientists have been dealing with this from the conception of modern science. So we're talking about 17th century, right. Many years. But no one ever asked this. So the binary assumption was implicit. Mm-hmm. People looked for differences, and when they found differences between humans with male and female genitalia, they concluded that this means that there is a male and a female system, a male and a female brain, mind, whatever. And we actually tested this. Mm-hmm. And show that this is not true. So it doesn't hold, at least not for the brain.
Oh, thank you. So it's what I'm about to ask is maybe a bit vague. And so I'll ask the formal question that I originally was thinking of, and you'll tell me if I'm conflating issues. So my question then is, okay, so kind of what does it look like, I think, to talk about what is sex in the brain, and is it fair to then sort of reformulate that question as follows: what is the binary understanding of sex in the brain? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, we can try.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with the question of what is sex, which I think is really important because we use the same word for many different things. Mm. So one, we use it for the binary division of humans into female and male, mm-hmm. which is based on the role in reproduction, and of course leaves out intersex individuals. So we can talk about this later. But for now, in reproduction, we have two types, mm-hmm. male and female. And even some intersex people, they can sometimes function as male or female in terms of reproduction, okay? Mm-hmm. So this is one meaning of sex, the binary division. So it's sex category. Another is using the word sex to describe a system, a biological system, which is comprised of genes and hormones. It is very loosely defined. So what genes are we included in this system, and what hormones are included in this system? But anyway, when we talk about sex effects on the brain, for example, we don't usually mean the fact that we have male or female genitalia. What we are thinking about is levels of testosterone, estradiol, etc. So this is the sex system. It's not the binary categorization into female and male. Now, the binary framework that comes from the observation that humans typically belong to either female or male categories in terms of reproduction, this binary understanding affects or biases our perception of any other thing that is related to sex, including the sex system itself. So this is why people may talk about male and female hormones, mm-hmm. as if humans with male and female genitalia have distinct sets of hormones, which is of course nonsense. So we all have all hormones, all sex-related hormones, and most of them in very similar levels in males and females. So estradiol and progesterone, for example, exist in similar levels in males and females, except pregnant females, which are a class of their own in terms of the levels of these hormones. Mm-hmm. And testosterone, which is in higher levels in males on average, but there is some overlap with females. So this idea of a distinct two sets of hormones has no basis in reality or in biology. Mm-hmm. And of course, in contrast to the the binary division of the genitalia, the sex as a system is always changing. Now, we are used to think of the changes in women with a cycle, menstrual cycle. But the levels of these hormones are changing all the time in males and females, also in response to environmental stimuli and conditions. Okay, so the idea, the binary conception of sex as stable, two systems, etc., not relevant when we think of sex as a system. Mm-hmm. And we really need to get rid of the binary formulation to actually study sex, what Sarah Richardson from Harvard calls sex itself, okay, which is the genes and hormones, etc. So this was a maybe long answer to the first question. Now, okay.
No, it's lovely. Thank you. It clarifies a lot. Because for example, I was often confused over the years about why, when we talk about, for example, sex hormones, there's this distinction when I had a sort of a vague understanding or a vague grasp that, everybody has all sorts of hormones. They're not distinctly in one quote unquote sex or the other. So what you've just talked about is really helpful. So then, okay, so you had mentioned the concept of intersex people, so people with genitalia that's not distinct. Can you talk a bit about what an intersex person is and how that person helps us understand just what you've mentioned, right, about reproductive sex versus a sex system, but also how intersex people have been mistreated, certainly by the medical community, given the aforementioned assumptions, the implicit assumptions that you talked about.
So we don't need intersex people to understand that the sex system is not binary, because it is also not binary even if you talk about male and females that are not intersex. What I think intersex reveal is that how the binary conceptualization or understanding of sex affects biology, affects reality, affects people. So the fact that most humans produce either eggs or sperm, which is the biological definition of male and female, if it didn't have such an important social meaning, then also the issue of intersex wouldn't be of importance. Mm-hmm. Because the fact that some people with testicles, for example, have a female external genitalia, as in some intersex condition, wouldn't be a thing, because whether you have male or female genitalia would have no meaning. Mm-hmm. So we wouldn't be obsessed with who is female and who is male, where intersex people have a problem, because you can use different definitions, if it didn't have any social meaning. And it's quite similar, for example, when people were obsessed with whether you are right-handed or left-handed.
Right, yes, yeah.
Yeah, not very long ago. So there were specific measures to establish whether you are right-handed or left-handed. And there were also debates about which is the best method to define. And, with the disappearance of the importance of handedness as a social category, we are no longer interested in whether you are right-handed or left-handed. You will not be hired or not be hired because you are right-handed or left-handed, as used to be the case, okay? And no one cares whether you use your left hand. So with the disappearance of the importance of the social meaning of handedness, also disappeared this obsession with whether you are right-handed and left-handed. And no one would really care whether you are using your right hand for some tasks and your left leg for other tasks. And okay, yeah. So the whole obsession as a culture with intersex, and also, and this is more problematic, the attempt to fit them into one of the boxes, and carry out surgeries, etc., on very young babies. So this is a problem. So the social binary is a problem, not sex. Sex is biology. It's not a problem to be solved.
Right. Yeah. So people over hundreds of years, that make observations, They develop some sort of very, obviously informal, non-scientific, hypothesis, and that hypothesis becomes a sort of social framework for thinking about the world. And because we end up with this set of structures or categories, we make mistakes about in applying those categories to people, and those mistakes lead to things like mistreating people based on their there's a word that I can't think of, but based on their ill-defined, if you will, genitalia, ill-defined according to the social conception, and so also suffering. People are kind of forced into ways of being that simply aren't natural. Does that seem like a fair summary of the kind of?
But this is true for all of us.
Okay.
We are all forced into two binary categories. Just, for most people, if they're not intersex, this does not involve surgeries.
Yeah.
But we are all forced. So if, you are a boy and someone tells you, don't cry, don't be a girl, you are forced into a category. So in this sense, we are all affected, and not in good ways, I think, by the binary system. And again, the problem is the binary social system. It's not whether some people have male genitalia, others have female genitalia, and some have intersex genitalia. This is not the problem. The problem is that we impose on this reality, which is mixed, even at the level of the genitalia, we impose a binary system. And when people do not fit the binary system, then we take very strong actions against them. Intersex people, it's surgery. With other gender non-conforming kids, adults, etc. It's more social punishing, but we are all, kept in line at all times. So, there are many examples to this that we can come back to this later, but maybe if you want, we can look just to see the idea of how brains are not male or female, because I think, at least in this case, it's better to, one image was 1,000 words.
Yes, lovely. Thank you. Okay, when you're ready.
Yeah, okay. So let me share this. Okay. So as I said, findings in animals that sex effects on the brain may be opposite under different conditions led me to the idea that brains will not be internally consistent in having only female typical or only male typical features, as is almost always true for the genitalia, as we just discussed, but rather brains would be comprised each of a unique mosaic of male typical and female typical features. And we analyzed by now over 20,000 human brains, the structure of over 20,000 human brains, to provide different types of evidence, and using also sophisticated machine learning algorithms, etc. I'm not going to go into this. I'm just going to show the basic analysis. Okay.
Yes.
So, and only of one subset of brains. So what we did here is we looked at MRI images of human brains. Probably, most people are familiar with these images. Divided each brain into 116 regions, measured the volume of each region in each brain, and wrote it down in a table like this one. And then to appreciate similarities and differences between the brains of men and women, we used the color code to paint each cell in the table. And the idea here is that a cell would be painted in green if this region in this brain is relatively large compared to this region in all other brains, men and women combined. And a region will be painted yellow if it is relatively small compared to the volume of this region in all other brains. Okay, so this is how we painted the table. And when we were done, this is what we saw.
Oh, wow.
This is the wow that I wanted. So on the left, you see brains of men, and on the right, brains of women, each line a single brain. And the important part is you don't need statistics to see that there are differences between the brains of men and women. At the group level, there's more green at the women's side and more yellow at the men's side. But you can also see at the same time that brains are rarely all green or all yellow. Instead, each brain is a unique mosaic, no two lines are the same, of green, which is more common, more typical of women, and yellow, which is more common in men. Mm-hmm. So I think these are really important images because they help create a new framework in which it is still true that there are group level differences between males and females, but there are no two types. And usually when we hear that there are differences in the brain between the brains of men and women, we immediately conclude that this must mean that they're right, that there are male brains and female brains. And here you can see a third option. So the binary framework, in the binary framework, there are only two options. Either men and women are the same or they are different. And what you see here is a third option. We are all different. No two brains are the same. So this is I think this is why this is so powerful for me, because it really provides a new framework of thinking about sex effects on whatever, in this case, the brain, and getting out of the binary framework, which restricts us to only two solutions. Either we are the same or we belong to two types. Mm-hmm. And here we see that neither is correct. We are not all the same because everyone is different, but truly we do not belong to two types. Okay? Yes. So this is what I wanted to show here.
So this then is, I don't know if foundation is the right word. I mean, you'll tell us, but this is the mosaic, right? So I was going to ask you, so what is the mosaic brain? You have obviously your findings, but you're also mounting a project to help us understand our own brains as mosaic brains. So what is the mosaic brain and what is the mosaic project?
Okay, so the mosaic brain you just saw. Yes. So it's understanding that brains are comprised of mosaics, each a unique mosaic. I think it was also very clear in the images that every line is different, or each line is different. So the idea that each brain is a mosaic of male typical and female typical features. And also in subsequent studies, we showed, again, this is using really different methods of deep learning or machine learning or whatever you want to call them, that sex provides no information on the differences and similarities between two brains. Mm-hmm. So the fact, for example, that we both have female genitalia doesn't mean that our brains are more similar than the brains of each of us and any other male, which is, of course, in complete opposition or contradiction to what we know about the genitalia. The fact that, we are both female, so we share a very similar reproductive system, which is very different from the system of any male. But in the brains, it's not only not exactly like this, it doesn't exist. So sex, knowing someone's sex category, provides no information of how their brain would be similar or different from yours. So this is regarding the brain. What we also showed, and now we are extending this, is that this is also true, and I think most people know this. This is also true of gendered characteristics. So if you go to psychology, preferences, attitudes, behaviors, etc., and you look for features that do show gender differences for whatever reason, and note that I do not discuss the question of nature versus nurture at all. Okay, so there are differences. I don't know why, but they are there. But then if you look at the individual, each of us possesses both feminine and masculine characteristics. Okay, it's very, at least in our studies, it's very rare to meet someone that has only feminine or only masculine characteristics. And what we are doing now, and let me show you, is indeed, we developed, it's really only now started operating, and it's still quite a beta site, but we developed this website and the gender mosaic questionnaire in which people can explore their own gender mosaic and learn about gender. And what we do is first they answer a set of questions about attitudes, preferences, and behaviors. And just to give an example, for example, when choosing a romantic partner, how important is it that your partner is rich? And please, you and our listeners, please choose a number. between 0, unimportant, and 4, indispensable. And I'll come back to this answer in a minute. And after they complete answering the question, they receive a feedback on each trait, on how feminine or masculine they are on each trait compared to people around the world. Now, obviously, what's considered masculine or feminine differs across cultures. So I can explain how we define this, and I think we learn about gender also from how we define this. So we gathered data now already from over 10 countries on the same questionnaire, okay? And we have a set of 1,500 people from each country. And this is, for example, the distribution of the answers for 1,500 people from Japan to the question that we all just answered. And men's answers are in blue, women's answers in red. And we can see that there is a difference, okay? We can see the group level difference. And specifically, we can see that more women than men chose answers 2, 3, and 4. So we would consider these answers feminine. And if this was your answer, then in your mosaic, the corresponding square would be red or pink. In contrast, answer 0 is more common among men than women. So it would be considered masculine and marked in blue. And finally, answer 1, it was similarly chosen by men and women. So it's neither feminine nor masculine. It's gender neutral. So it will be painted in yellow. Simple. But what will happen if instead of comparing your answer or the participants' answer to the Japanese sample, we compared it to the answers of 1,500 Americans? Okay, so this is their distribution. And we can see that in this sample, there was hardly any difference between the answers of men and women to this same question, making all answers gender neutral. So regardless of how much how important it is to you that your romantic partner is rich, now the corresponding square in your mosaic would be yellow. And when participants finish, this is what they get. So this is my mosaic. And when my answers were compared to the American sample. So you can see in my mosaic, in some traits, I'm feminine or slightly feminine. On others, I'm masculine or slightly masculine. And on some, gender neutral. Okay? And this is my mosaic when it is compared to the Japanese sample and to an Israeli sample.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now, remember that my answers have not changed.
Yes.
What is causing the change from each panel is the definition of each trait of my answers are feminine or masculine in comparison in the specific culture.
Yes, yes.
So what you can learn here is first about your own gender mosaic, and you can explore, and every square you touch, it will open what feature it is and why it is colored this way, and some fun facts about this. But so you can learn about your unique mosaic. You can see how you change in whether you're feminine, masculine, and what in comparison to different comparison groups. And also you can learn about gender and the cultural dependence of gender. Okay, so on some traits I change, from being masculine to being feminine.
Right,
it's the same answer, but whether it's considered masculine or feminine has changed. And just a fun fact, because we already have quite a lot of answers. So this is my mosaic, and of course I'm not unique. And you can see these are the results of other people. So you can see, and again, what you can appreciate here is how everyone is different. So no two mosaics, like the brain, no two mosaics are the same. And instead of celebrating this, wonderful variability, what our society is trying to do is take this, huge variability and compress it into 2 boxes, blue and red, boys and girls, women and men, etc. So this is the aim of the project, and of course it's designed both to provide in very fun way the idea of the mosaic and more complex understanding of gender, or more critical understanding of gender, especially the binary, the gender binary, and of course we will gather information about people's attitudes, behaviors, etc., and we can further explore this interesting topic.
Oh, so I did visit the site and I filled out the questionnaire. If memory serves, what I didn't do was look at the cross-cultural comparisons. And what I found stunning about just the visual representation of your brain compared with other brains from other countries is that, like you say, depending on how the culture sort of defines gender, you change.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that leads me. So I hope. Oh yeah, I hope people will go to the Gender Mosaic website, and we'll make sure that we have the link up again.
And I can also say that it's not only in English. I mean, the website is only in English, but the questionnaire is available in 10 different languages. So you can, so many people around the world can do it in their own language. So we can, they can be more accurate. And
so two questions about the Gender Mosaic project. One is a question about what if there is an endpoint to the project in terms of amassing data, right? What is that? If there is one, what is it? And then the other question is, what do you envision for a future in which we successfully break out of binary thinking about gender?
Okay, so let's start with the first question. So luckily and gladly, I recently received an ERC advanced grant, which also supports this project. So this will allow me, to keep the website alive for longer, and this already allowed me to translate the questionnaire into more languages, etc. So I'm really glad. And my vision is that the questionnaire is, the website is there, and people can continue to enjoy it for as long as I have the funds to keep it active. In terms of the research, the more the merrier, of course. And already the data that we have is very interesting in terms of cultural differences in so many aspects, just in the things that we measure, and then gender differences in the different traits, etc. So there is plenty of data there. And of course, the plan is that it will be available for researchers throughout the world, not just to us, so it can serve the entire scientific community. And we, of course, are focusing mainly on questions related to the mosaic and things like this. But there is so much data there, and we are just starting, that I'm sure others can benefit, and I'm welcoming any type of collaboration regarding this. So this is one part. The question about a world without gender, which is indeed my vision. And I think if you remember my three mosaics, different mosaics in different cultures, and you look at it and you really think, this is absurd, because I'm the same person with my unique set of attitudes, abilities, and preferences. Yet whether these are considered appropriate to people with my type of genitalia varies across cultures. So, and clearly different cultures value some attitudes and preferences differently. But the question is, why should such judgments depend on whether we have male or female genitalia? And this for me is the most important point. And, when you look at all the mosaics that each of us is, and the huge variability, I think many people can share my vision. Wouldn't it be much better if we lived in a world in which each of us could live according to their unique mosaic of abilities and preferences, rather than according to the type of genitalia we have? So I think, when you look at this and when you appreciate that not only you are mosaic, because I think people know this about themselves. Everyone can name a few feminine and a few masculine characteristics. I think what people do not know, and I hope the website will help and our conversation will help, is realizing that everyone is mosaic. So it's not that something is wrong with me, that I have, as a female, have some masculine traits, or as a male have some feminine. Everyone is like this. And maybe we can start celebrating this variability instead of trying to, deny it, suppress it in us and in others. And because I know it's difficult to imagine a world in which sex carries no social meaning, it's just, one of our physical attributes like eye color or handedness. Mm-hmm. So actually the example that I give is handedness. Yeah. Because from something so important, like 50 years ago, if parents or teachers were noticing that the kid was using the left hand, they used to tie that hand. So the kid had to use the right hand. And also think of the word, the right hand, right and wrong, right and left. Okay, so it's so much in our language. And it disappeared. No one cares today, whether the US president was left-handed. This wasn't a big deal. It was a big deal that he was black, not that he was left-handed. Okay, so I wish also the color of the skin would lose its social meaning. And so I wish the form of the genitalia will lose its social meaning. Mm-hmm. It is important in some situations, whether you have female or male genitalia, mainly situations related to reproduction. Mm-hmm. So if you want to have a baby and you want to achieve this by having sex with someone else, then you need to know what type of genitalia you have and what type of genitalia the other person has. Mm-hmm. But the importance of sex in our society extends, far beyond reproduction. Mm-hmm. And this is what I want to get rid of.
Thank you so much for this incredibly illuminating conversation about sex, gender, and the reality of our mosaic brains. Thank you so much, Dr. Joel. We appreciate your time and expertise. Before we end, is there anything that you're thinking about that we haven't covered that you would like to share with our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, maybe one last thing. Mm-hmm. And this is that, people in our culture as a whole are obsessed with the question of gender differences, mm-hmm. whether they exist and where they come from, etc. And people often ask me whether in a world without gender, mm-hmm. there would still be group level differences between humans with male and female genitalia. Mm-hmm. And I want to say something about this because I think it's important. And my answer always been and always will be that I have no clue. So I don't know whether in a world without gender, there would still be group level differences between the brain and behavior, etc., of humans with male and female genitalia. But I am certain that in a world without gender, we simply wouldn't care. Mm. And that's the important point. And why should we care? If I love, practicing martial arts, which I do, why should I or anyone else care whether it's more common in humans with male or female genitalia? We don't care whether it's more common with human with, blue or brown eyes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the important point about this is that we don't care about this not because there are many studies showing that there are no differences between humans with blue and brown eyes. We don't care because eye color carries no social meaning. So that's the point. A world without gender is not a world in which everyone is the same. Actually, it's the opposite. It's a world in which we celebrate diversity and variability. But it's a world in which we do not care whether there are group level differences between humans with this or that type of genitalia, eye color, skin color, etc. And I hope, people realize why this is a much better future than the very restrictive social structure that we call gender binary in which we all live now.
That's a fascinating point, that when we shift our thinking to align with the empirical facts, the sorts of questions that reflect binary thinking, those end up dissolving. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so very much for your time and expertise. And I hope we'll be able to meet again and check in on how the Gender Mosaic project is going.
Thank you.